A lot of the stuff that I make here on the channel is either dark or emotional, so in this video I'm going to be switching things up with something ambient and chill. This project is quite slow at 78 BPM and I'm working in the scale of E minor. These ambient type beats rely heavily on sound selection. Sounds that are too bright or harsh are not going to work here, so we're looking for some nice smooth sounds. The first sound that I added is the Glass 1 preset from the piano pads library in Labs. To keep things simple, I just went with a 2-chord progression that goes from an E minor to a G major. You'll see that I took the D from my G minor and moved it down an octave, and then I just copied this across and added some variation to the last chord. Next, I sent this pad to the mixer where I'm just using an EQ to cut out some low frequencies. This is going to leave some room for some of the other instruments that I added later. Next, I wanted to layer this sound with another pad, so I went to heat up 3 and chose the breath preset. And the pattern for this is literally just a copy of my first chord progression. I've got a similar EQ on this that's just cutting out a little bit more of the low end. And then to make it sound a little wider, I'm using Valhalla Vintage Verb with the mix at around 13%. The next sound is from the free IO Mini plugin. The preset that I used is called Wind Keys, and I used this to add a small accent at the start and end of every 4 bars. Onto this I added RC20 with some wobble, distortion, and then some stereo separation to make it sound wider. For this beat, I wanted to make multiple counter melodies so I can drop them in and out throughout the track to keep things interesting. I'm not doing anything too complex here, just stacking multiple melodies from different sounds. For the next counter melody, I went to heat up 3 and chose a bell preset called Light. This pattern's just using notes that are already in my chords to further colour the melody. Onto this, I've then got an EQ that's cutting out some of the lows and lower mids, some reverb from Valhalla Vintage with my mix at 15%, and lastly I added RC20 with only the whip feature on to make it sound a bit more wide. For the next counter melody, I went to Flex and chose the Haunting Hour preset. To begin with, this sound was a bit more harsh than I wanted it to be, so I just used the cut-off knob in the filter section to muffle it a little bit. The last thing I added to this melody really helped it sound a lot more full and complete. I chose the driven runner arpeggio sound from Analog Lab to introduce a whole new rhythm to the melody. All I did was copy in my chord progression and I ended up with a sequenced melody that sounds like this. Onto this ARP, I then added an EQ with this bandpass curve that's going to cut out all of the highs and lows. And next I added an instance of RC20 with the space module turned on and the width knob cranked all the way up to the max. With all my melodic elements down, I next went to Analog Lab and found myself a bass. And I kept the pattern for this extremely simple, just following the bottom notes from each of my chords. To make the bass sound a bit more crunchy, I'm using the Beefy preset from Decapitator. Then I've also got an EQ that's just boosting some of the lower frequencies. When making these ambient type beats, I tend to keep my drum patterns quite simple. Having your drum patterns too busy is only going to take away from the ambient feel that we're going for. All of the drums that I used in this beat are from the 404 drum kit, so I'll leave some links to that in the video description. Straight away you'll see that my hi-hats have a lot of gaps in between them, and I'm also using the velocity to help create extra bounce. I've chose to add these hi-hat rolls at the end of each 2-bar phrase, and this is going to help add some variation. There's not really too much to see with my clap, I'm just hitting on the third beat of every bar. I chose to go with a clap over a snare as I feel it just fits the ambient vibe a bit better. The next thing I added is this percussive beep sound, and I just have this hitting on the first beat of the second bar. I wanted this sound to be quite muffled, so again I'm using a bandpass and I've just cut a harsh frequency from the high end. Onto this I also added a very subtle reverb at 5%. And lastly I added the eternity delay with my time setting on half a bar, and I have my delay mode set to ping pong. And the last drum element I needed to add is my kick. I wanted this pattern to be quite spacious, so you'll see that I've placed my kicks quite sparingly. I then just went to the channel EQ to cut out all of the mids and highs to leave me with a nice thumpy kick sound. For arrangement, I wanted to keep my chord progression playing all the way through, and then I slowly start introducing the counter melodies throughout the intro. Then just before we go into the first hook, I've actually cut out some of the instruments to help emphasize the drop. I've added a filter plug into my melody bus, and I'm automating the cutoff to sweep these instruments in. During the hook, I have all of my instruments playing apart from this lead sound, which only comes in on the second half. Then just before the end of my hook, I'm cutting some of these instruments out, and this is going to help the change from high to low energy sound a bit less drastic. I've dropped a lot of my instruments out for the verse, leaving only the chords and one of my counter melodies. At the end of these first 8 bars, I've then cut some of my patterns short before the rest of my melodic elements come back in. The bass line also comes back in on this second half, as well as my closed hi-hat. After the verse, I then chose to go with a bridge, which is the lowest energy part of the song. This section's only 8 bars long, and it allows the track to breathe before we go back into the hook. This structure then pretty much just repeats itself for the rest of the beat. So let's take a listen to how it sounds from start to finish. And that is going to bring us to the end of the video. As always, I'm interested to know how you guys think the beat came out, so let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed the video or if you learned anything new from it, then make sure to hit the thumbs up button before you leave. And if you're new to the channel, then do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. The channel's closing in on 5,000 subscribers, and as promised, I've got a huge giveaway planned for as soon as we get there. If you'd like to get access to this FLP as well as all of the other sessions from my videos, then you need to be a member of my Patreon. I'll leave a link to that as well as all of the other ways you can support the channel in the description. If you'd like to know how I make orchestral melodies from scratch, then I'll leave a link to that video up here, and I'll just leave you a random video from the channel down here. Big shout out to anybody that's still here at the end of the video. I've been Era, thanks for watching, and I'll hopefully catch you all in the next one.